The Reaper's Trust. Chapter 3. Fight Back. The antiseptic smell of the medical center was gone, along with the bold sunlight. Violet relaxed in the comfort of quiet and darkness. Curtains were drawn over windows, and the room, small and cozy, was lit only by the dim glow of blue flame. It danced atop a tall candle in silence, for the only sound Violet could hear was her own breathing. She briefly looked up from her book and eyed the snow globe on her nightstand. Much like her twisting thoughts, the white flakes swirled around the confines. Looking deeper into the tiny, snowy world revealed images of children. Violet saw herself and her sister, laughing and playing among the winter. They had not a care in the world then. A sigh escaped the mage, and she pulled her gaze from the snow globe. The good memories only made her long for word from her family, and she had lost hope that she'd ever receive that. Violet turned her attention back to the book before her. She stretched lackadaisically on her bed and leaned back against the pillows as she studied advanced notes on the arcane. Many times had the pages been read, but Violet never failed to gain joy from them. Reading and rereading both held value to her. She was always delighted with the new information she would find during second looks. Letting herself slip into sheer relaxation, she focused on her breathing and savored the scents that filled her humble cottage. The cedar candles were wonderful and lured Violet deeper into her bed. She trusted her weight to the pillows and shut her eyes, surrounded by all that she loved. The only company she needed was that which the books and candles provided. The cry of despair, a simple knock, tore Violet from her peace. She lurched upward and snapped her eyes open, darting her gaze to the wooden door. Her breathing went silent, but her heart roared. She stared like a deer in a road, as if a monster was about to crash through the wall. If she stayed still, they would leave. All she had to do was be quiet and still. She told herself that over and over, but then questioned her line of thinking. What kind of life was she living? She felt like a coward. Clutching the hope that her visitor was friendly, Violet found her resolve and stood from her bed. Slowly, she opened her door. Her stomach twisted in a knot. Soon she was shoved back inside and held in by a familiar person, clearly a tailor based on her pinstripe uniform. Violet grunted when she was pushed against the wall, a small block of wood pressed to her chest. "You can't be in here," she gasped, shocked that the woman had enough nerve to enter her home. "Be quiet," the tailor ordered. She pushed the block closer, causing a burning sensation in Violet's chest. The wood had a teleportation seal carved into it, and it conflicted with the mage's energy. At such a close range, the pain was enough to make her grit her teeth and squeeze her eyes shut. She did as she was told. "I need you for something. Follow me if you don't want this to get bad, okay?" the tailor said. There wasn't anger or malice in her narrow eyes, just determination. The selfish kind that made Violet furious. "This is already bad. Just leave me alone," Violet cried, but a hand flew over her mouth. A chill began spreading inside of her, but she stifled it. Though hate was sinking in, she did her best to remember her mentor's advice. She was not to be vengeful. Yet she found her vengeful urges only grew as she followed the tailor through the gardens and to another cottage. Unable to teleport, Violet couldn't think of an escape that wouldn't harm either her attacker or her surroundings. As always, the only answer seemed to be surrender. She watched as the awful woman examined the cottage they arrived at. Violet had encountered her several times in the past, but never alone. She was nobody to the mage, just a selfish, heinous tailor whose name could not be recalled. Her identity blurred with the others who shared her twisted mentality. She was barely a person to Violet. "Unlock this for me." The tailor pointed to the door of the cottage. Upon it was a glowing signal, yellow in color and of simple difficulty. Violet knew exactly how to unlock it. The tailor continued, "I need a mage to unlock another mage's door, so go ahead." "Why don't you just knock like you did for me?" Violet growled. "If I was foolish enough to open up, I'm sure this person will be too. I need to get in while they're out." That tells me you're going to steal something. I won't help you break into someone's house. Pain tore through Violet's back. She was slammed into the outside of the cottage, pinned once again by the teleportation seal and the girl's grip. She welcomed a surge of both pain and rage. "Do it," demanded the tailor. Violet again refused, and earned a slap to her arm. A bruise surely settled into her pale skin. She felt her magic flaring up within her chest, begging to be unleashed that it may act upon her animosity. She fixed her cold gaze on her attacker, imagining how incredible it would feel to lash out. One feeble body would crumble against her power. She resisted and shut her eyes. "Please stop. You're hurting me." "You're making this hard on yourself. Just do as I say, and I'll let you go," the woman replied. "Do it." Then she threw her fist into the mage's stomach. Violet knew for a long time who she was angry with. This tailor was not the only one to torment her, for her magic had been used by many of the king's candidates over many years. Lately, the events had become more frequent and the attacks more brutal. Violet's hatred was spread between all of her pursuers, but it gathered densely at one individual, one person who was connected to every event. The sun had almost completely set. Violet would soon be late for her session with Charles. She shoved the tailor off and directed her magic to the door. Rather than unlocking the sigil, Violet split it apart. Its halves exploded in a shower of particles, and the door flew open from the force. Blue energy, riled and crackling and pulsating, flowed from her eyes and hands. She panted angrily, not exhausted in the slightest. Pain pounded through her midsection from the punch, and with it came pure rage. She whipped around and raised her hand to the tailor threateningly. The two stood in silence for a moment. The only sound was the crackling of Violet's magic. She loved the spark of fear in the girl's eyes, and the itch to attack became even harder to resist. Violet looked upward toward the small palace that rested atop a floating island. There, she saw the balcony where she and the king had stood so many times. His voice, his advice, echoed in her mind. She looked back to the tailor and lowered her hand, magic fading. The mage shook, victim to a maelstrom of emotion. "Don't touch me ever again," she hissed. Then she ran. She ran as fast as she could until she was out of the teleportation seal's range. There was little point in hurting that girl. Violet knew she had to strike the problem at its source. She gazed at the floating island before warping there. Violet appeared through a storm of blue particles. She looked around the palace hallway and studied the walls. Full bookcases cluttered the narrow space, and staffs were hung up in an organized fashion. Some were wooden and twisting, others straight and composed of stone. All were magical, much like nearly everything atop the floating island. One glance out the window revealed the small world below, the cottages, fields, medical centers, shops, gardens. They all stared up at Violet as they bathed in the fading orange glow of dusk. This world that Charles made for his test was full of life and color, but it did not match the beauty of his homeworld. Violet had only visited several times, but she could never forget the palace there. It put this one to shame. She left the window and treaded through the halls in search of Charles. In her solitude, she welcomed suspicion. The more she thought, the more flaws she found in her mentor's great test. He had created this floating island and this small palace, but what purpose did it serve when he had a much grander home on his own world? Perhaps he only wanted the lookout, a place where he could observe at a closer range. Yet he was the ruler of all. Surely he could see anything from anywhere. Violet held her stomach as if it would numb her pain. She couldn't stifle her anger either. Wandering the corridors grew tiresome, and once the moon was out, she had nearly given up on finding the king. "Ah, Violet," said a soft and cheery voice from behind. Violet turned around to see Charles in all his flamboyancy. His typically sly grin wilted at the sight of his student's grim expression. "Are you all right?" he asked. I'm fine, lied the Frostillion. Where were you? I've been looking everywhere. Forgive my lateness, dear. I am busy, but I make time for you. Charles smiled. And you also made this entire palace for me, too. Almost like you care. The king paused. Whatever do you mean? There's no reason for this to be here. It only exists to be a place where you can teach me. Isn't that right? Violet blinked, giving the king a solemn look. You don't want to show yourself to the others, and you don't want to take me off this world. So you made a middle ground. This floating island. A light laughter escaped the king. You're sharp, Violet, he praised. But I'm concerned about your other remark. I do care about you. I know that. Violet stared deeply at Charles, piercing him with her gaze. Master and student began their session, with Charles explaining complex spells and enchantments to Violet. Her attention wandered and focused on the ill will that was taking root inside her head, stretching its vines and branches into the darkest corners of her mind. Aches erupted as well, reminding her of how awfully she had been treated. Each bruise seemed to strike a second time, screaming at her for being so foolish. As the king shared his knowledge with her, she twitched with agitation. She understood him. She understood every word that the mightiest being, the most powerful entity, was saying. She possessed vast power and potential, exceptional skill and talent. She performed every spell she was taught without flaw and had even developed many of her own, yet she was used like a tool by the lesser. Patterns are key, Charles cooed. Weaving your magic in reverse patterns will help you stabilize your spells, as complicated as these. Glass vases shattered, the shelves that held them now full of shards. Violet slammed her fist on the table and huffed. What has gotten into you? Charles shouted. Why? Violet rasped. Blue sparks poured from her eyes, reflecting her anger. Why did you choose them? Who? The ones who torment and use me. Violet slowly approached the king. You see potential in thieves and brutes? Charles looked at the fancy carpet. Different potential is in different people. Don't lie to me. You brought wicked people here to cause conflict. That isn't true. You only really see potential in some of us. Calm down, Violet. I deserve to hear the truth. Thick cracks shot through the windows. The palace shook, then stilled. Master and student stared one another down in the sudden silence of the dim room. Papers and books had been scattered, thrown from their places by Violet's telekinesis. Shards of glass spilled across the floor, reflecting the fallen moonlight like glitter. Charles looked aside. You must calm down, he breathed. Violet clenched her teeth. She shook. I don't trust you. The king's posture, forever tall and proud, at last sank. His eyes shimmered with a brief wetness. You've let this happen. Do something about it, Violet whispered, the edge of her words covered in frost. She leaned in, her voice chilling the king's skin. Or I will.